Someone like Salim Vuria, who I happen to know, the governor of Kwale, for example, you can't say that, oh, you know, those people in Nairobi are doing whatever it is.
You have nowhere to hide.
You have nowhere
anymore.
to hide. I mean, it's
That's
not
true.
like the member of parliament who come to Nairobi and sit at Continental Building and disappear there for 5 years and say, oh, najua tunatengeneza sheria huko Nairobi. You can't do that. As governor, you will sit there. So people will actually ask you questions, some of them in mother tongue, and they'll begin to realize, wait a minute, I mean, it's not the guys in Nairobi who are messing us up. This messing up business can happen even here.
Yeah.
So then they begin to think very differently. And I think that there will be a lot of scrutiny of the people who become governors in the next election, as opposed to this one where there were a lot of traditional, typical politicians who thought, well, this is a bigger title than a member of parliament, let me go for it. So in a sense, I think that we are doing very well. The number of, I'm trying to go through some document here to see whether it can be a little bit more helpful than...
with respect at least to registered voters.
Yes, but we'll look at that in a moment. But what I was trying to say about this devolved structure of government is that, in a sense, one, it helps people to think about what their real issues are, because it is very easy right now for some politicians to go to the village and say, well, it is those other guys who are doing this. It's now our turn to eat. Yet now the eating might actually happen at a very local level where people actually speak the same language. That is one. Secondly, things like what you were talking about, the 25% rule. It is actually meant to say that if you're going to be president of this country, fine, you might mobilize around your tribe and all those things, but at least there will be some indication that you enjoy some support nationally. If Uhuru Kenyatta is able to get 25% in Kisii County, for example, which I think he might, then that will say that even though the bulk of his support may come from central Kenya, for example, he is recognized as a leader by other parts of the country. If he gets 25% in Mombasa, for example, or gets 25% in Isiolo, that's an indication of something. And I think based on what we've been looking at, you see that the two candidates, Raila and Uhuru, actually, that is not their problem. The real competition is at the 50% plus one.
Let me just ask a question and look at the flip side of devolution, and perhaps anecdotally using the example of a country like the United States. Do we run the risk of becoming a very insular nation, caught in our own little corners, focusing on our own little issues, and therefore not focusing on the bigger issue, and especially in a country that coming from the past that we have, therefore putting our own sort of local interests ahead of the nation? No, do we run that risk now going into this devolved system?
We probably do, but I think that the Constitution is quite alive to that. The new Constitution tends to make it absolutely clear first that we are a unitary state. They limit very much the sort of issues that the county governments will be dealing with. That is why you find that on the bigger questions of, say, foreign policy or the education system, the economy, the bigger questions of the economic planning at the policy level, fine, you decide on your local priorities, but then the thinking about how the entire country ought to work in economic terms tends to happen at the national level. And therefore, there's always this thing at the back of your mind, if you're a governor, that you have to deal with Nairobi, whether you like it or not, because you are not an independent county, but rather you are part of a unitary system of government.
Actually, it reminds me of the discussion that Anne and Alicia and Noah were having about the port, as well as with Hassan Omar, and the perception down at the coast that the port, not just in Mombasa but in Lamu, belongs to the people of Lamu. Those are national assets, but I still feel though that there might be that opportunity that people will exploit because of the fact that they are so, the devolution has come so close to them that they now can forget about everywhere else.
Yes, I mean, I think that after this election there will have to be a period, and I'm not sure who's going to do this, but there has to be a period where people's expectations will have to be managed. Because I remember, for example, when I visited I think, was it Taita Taveta County. And these people have big issues about land, for example. And there is a national park which takes, I think, 60% or so of the county.
Yeah.
And these people actually know that this national park is a valuable asset. I mean, there are lots of tourists who come there and bring in a lot of money. So their idea of devolution is this, that immediately we get our own governor and our own county structures in place, what do? The first thing will be to tell KWS, thank you very much. Let's now deal with our issues here.
We can manage
and then we can manage this on our own. I mean, actually one of the MPs there said, well, we will just tell KWS, you can come in as experts, you know, like consultants to help us manage this, but we will be running the show. And yet that's not necessarily true, because some of these national parks are still seen as national parks.
Yes.
And so if you're talking about Amboseli, you're talking about Taita Taveta, these are national parks, Meru National Park, all these places. And so the expectation is that these things exist in our county, and that is a debate about the Mombasa port. The people down there expect that because this port happens to fall within a geographical location called Mombasa County, then it should generally benefit the people there more than others. But there is an argument to be made, and it is recognized the world over. If you're going to exploit oil in Turkana, there's no way
you can just take it out of the ground and
exactly, and leave those people with their own problems. So that balance has to be struck, that people will not look at that port and say, that port, you know. I mean,
there has to be some sense of ownership.
They have to buy in and say that this is, whereas this is a national asset, but then there are certain things that they can benefit from. I mean, there's no way, if you want someone to do some job at the port, there are people around there who can do certain jobs without many questions being asked, because just because this thing happens to fall within their land in the wider sense of that word. And so people need to feel that that belongs to them, and therefore that balance has to be struck, that if in terms of jobs and whatever, there have to be opportunities given to the people there, so that they don't feel that this thing was planted in their midst without their permission.
Joe, let's go back to the numbers for a moment and just look at them, and like we said, these are numbers that we've come up with, constituencies that we've been able to look at and see that they haven't as yet been tallied by the IEBC, adding up to the final tally, after which the determination will be made as to whether we'll be going to a runoff or we will have the fourth president of this Republic of Kenya. Speaking of the fourth president, it's 50 years, a very talismanic year for Kenya, and at the same time a very crucial one with respect to this election. Like you can see from the numbers, 43, it's coming down to about a spread of 98 counties, almost evenly. And it's indicative of how the entire race has been run on a razor-thin majority, one way or another. How important is it that the next president, the incoming president after Mwai Kibaki, focuses on the building of a nation state, given the fact that this election is so close?
Extremely important. How they'll do it, I don't know. Because look at it. We've been a divided nation for a while. I mean, 2007 proved it, that all of us were sitting here thinking that we were one country. We had been talking about...
Joe, let me stop you for a moment and talk about these numbers. That's 4,104,247 for Uhuru Kenyatta. Raila Odinga just topping out, or rather just getting past the 3.5 million mark at 3,680,440. Musalia Mudavadi not doing too badly as far as the rest of his competitors are concerned, going towards 300,000, 273,743. We should be expecting another briefing. Of course, Sophia Wanuna is on the ground. Another briefing on the next constituencies to be called, to be tallied. The ones that we're talking about: Bahati, Balambala, Baringo North, Baringo South, Bomet East, Bura, Butere, Butula, Buri, Central Elementary. I'll just go through them again. Chesumei, Chuka, Emuhaya, Emurua, Dikir, Fafi, Funyula, Garsen, Geshugu, Igembi North, Ijara, Ikolomani, Isiolo North, Jomvu, Kabete, Kachaliba, Kaloleni, Kangema, Kapenguria, Keses, Kibwezi East, Kibwezi West, Kieni, Kiharu, Kilifi North, Kiminini, Kisauni, as well as Konoin, Lafe, Laisamis, Lari, Loima, Luanda, Lurambi, Mara, Manyata, Marakwet East and Marakwet West, Madare, Matungulu, Mavoko, Mbere North, Mbere South, Mbita, Molo, Mount Elgon, Mumias West, Mvita, not Mbita, but Mvita this time, Mwala, Mwingi West, Nakuru Town West, Narok South, Narok West, Navaholo, Ndaragwa, Ndhiwa, Njoro, North Hor, North Imenti, North Mugirango, Nyali, Odhaya, Pokot South, Rabai, Rangwe, Roysambu, Samburu East, Samburu North, Samburu West, Seme, Sirisia, it's quite a list here, Suna East, Suna West, Teso North, Teso South, Thika Town, Tiati, and this is Tongaren, Turbo, Turkana Central, Turkana East, Turkana South, Turkana West, Webuye East, Webuye West, and West Mugirango. Those are the last counties, the ones that will determine whether we will be going to a runoff or we will have another president, the fourth president of the Republic of Kenya, by some time this morning, actually. I was going to say tomorrow. Yeah, so Joe, looking at these numbers, even though they are representative of a total number of registered voters in the county, what do you think this translates for Raila Odinga? Just to recap something that we had spoken about earlier, what do you think his saving grace might be if he's going to be able to either force a runoff or take this over?
Take over, I think it's going to be very difficult. I mean, let's face it, looking at that margin, I was just doing a quick calculation, and it is about 423,000. So for him is to stop Uhuru Kenyatta from taking it in round one, because then he has another chance to fight, because in the second round, who knows, the dynamics might be different. For Uhuru Kenyatta, he has to climb back and go over the 50% mark, because right now he's not there. Right now, just a quick calculation of that is at 49.6, close but not good enough. So between now and tomorrow, when the IEBC is announcing the results, his numbers have to go over the 50% mark again, because remember he fell below the 50% mark, I think a little bit a little after 10 o'clock thereabouts or something.
Going towards midnight, actually.
Yeah, something like that. And so he has been there. He was at some point actually at 48.1 or something like that, even at 47 at some point. But right now he has climbed up again. He has widened the gap. He's at 423. At some point he was, I think, at 150,000 or something like that. So between now and the time that the IEBC announces the final result, we hope it's going to be later today, still as they promised. He has to run up those numbers. They have to get to over 50%. For Raila Odinga, he has to push his a little bit to maybe 46% or 45 point something. And so because for as long as he's at 45 point something, chances are that he's going to deny Uhuru Kenyatta the 50% thing.
And keeping that in mind, how important is a county or a constituency rather like Mathare? How important are constituencies like those where there really is no clear
he has to get the numbers. He has to be the one that has the upper edge, the upper hand. Right now, Uhuru Kenyatta has an edge. He has a big lead. He has 400,000 in a tight race like this. Is a big margin. So he has to keep getting those numbers. He has to get to a point where his percentage point is something like I said, 45, 46. 45 is good enough for him, because then he would get to deny Uhuru Kenyatta that chance of taking this in round one. Like we said, it is still early. By the standards of this race, it's still very early. Anything could happen, and so I think between now and the time that that final announcement is made, there is going to be quite some drama in this race.
Now we do have the numbers here, the total number of registered voters per constituency for these 98 counties. Why do I keep saying counties? Constituencies.
That is a good thing, because one of the things that I think would be important is for us to start thinking county as opposed to a lot of other things. I'm just trying to see whether I can get a copy for you. I will just take everything. But really, if you look at those numbers, what is going to be important at the end of the day really is to get to know who lives where in terms of these numbers, the registered voters. Let me just check some of the Taita Taveta, you said, is still out there. Taveta, that was it, 24,000 registered voters. I'm just trying to get to some interesting the Igembes. Which one was that? Igembe South, 45,000.
Yes,
registered
that's a
voters.
That's a big
number.
That's
a big number. Igembe Central, 50. No, Igembe Central is done.
Let me
is
check.
it Igembe North?
I believe it's Igembe North. Huh? Let's go to the eyes. Ikolomani, Isiolo North. Igembe North. It's Igembe North. Check Geshugo as well, because Geshugo is still
so
out
Igembe
there.
North, but there's Mara also, which is in Tharaka Nithi, it's 50,000.
Wow.
There is Manyata, 74,000. So quite some numbers there.
Very big numbers. Kabete. How about a place like Kacheliba?
There's Matungulu.
Matungulu is there as well.
Matungulu is in Machakos. That's 47,000.
That's a big number, and because it's in Lower East, and we'd expect that Raila will carry the day.
54,000.
Those are very big numbers.
Not too bad. Kibwezi East, 40,000. We have Odaya, 47,000. We have Ndaragwa, I think I heard you read that, 41,000.
Yes.
Ishugu, 66,000.
Okay.
Kangema, 39,000. Which other one?
There's Mbere North, Mbere South.
Kabete, 62,000.
Kabete?
Yes.
Yeah. Konoin?
The Turkanas, not too much. The counties in the constituencies in Turkana County that I think are still out there. 23,000 Turkana North, 21,000 Turkana West, 18,000 Loima. But of course
there's Turkana Central, Turkana East, Turkana South, and Turkana
all the Turkanas
West.
Basically.
Yes.
The Turkana Central has quite some numbers, 34,000, not so bad. Kapenguria, 41,000.
That's also a big number.
That's also a big number, yes.
And where do you think Kapenguria is going to go?
Kapenguria is more Jubilee than it is called. It is, from what we have seen in, I think, was it Sigor?
Yeah.
And generally the voting patterns up there right now, I think you could say with people like Samuel Pogisio in Kachaliba.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing thing because John Lonyangapo got elected, and he's was running on a Kanu ticket. So I think it's an interesting place that we'll have to wait and see. But in terms of how they might swing, I think they'll swing towards Jubilee more than CORD. But
do you have the Baringos there as well? There's Baringo North, Baringo South.
Yes, Baringo North is 32,000, Baringo South 26,000.
And Bomet East as well is on there.
Bomet, I'll be checking that shortly.
Just as Joe checks.
But there is Kajiado as well. Was there Kajiado something?
I think we checked off Kajiado as we were cleaning up this list.
Okay, Bomet Central.
Bomet East.
Bomet East is 41,000 votes.
Wow.
Then there is Lurambi, which is in Kakamega, right? That's still out.
Yes.
Lurambi, 61,000.
Luanda.
There is Navajolo.
Yes, Navajolo is also there as well.
41,000 registered voters. Mumias
West.
Done. Mumias West, 37,000. Matungu, 45,000.
I think it's Matungulu, the one that's.
Oh, it's
that's
Matungulu.
Yeah.
Matungulu probably is done. Ikolomani done?
No.
37,000. Luanda, 36. Emuhaya, 31.
Now, even though he hasn't had a very strong showing in this election, what is the influence, or rather, what could be the influence of a man like Musalia Mudavadi in the Kolomanis, in the Lurambis?
The influence is right there. 273,000 votes right now.
Yeah.
Many people tell you if he were not running, probably more than 2/3 of those votes will probably be. Some people say up to 80% maybe would be in Raila Odinga's column.
In this home stretch, though, I mean, do you think that he could hurt Raila's chances in these constituencies?
Oh, you mean in terms of the constituencies that are left in Western? Yes, but not a whole lot. I think that just the fact that he's taking away something like 20% of the vote. Obviously, in a tight race like that, you need every vote that you can get.
Yeah.
But I think that he hasn't made the kind of strong showing that a lot of people thought he would. And so even in his own backyard, Raila, I think, has done very well. He has beaten Raila marginally in Vihiga County, for example. I mean, Vihiga constituency, that is very close to his Abatia backyard.
Yes.
But you look at, I think, Hamisi and of course we talked about Muhaya. Even in Kakamega, the whole of Kakamega, there is the Musalia influence, but it's not very strong. And whereas those votes most likely would have gone in Raila's column, I think he hasn't, so far, we haven't seen evidence that it's hurt him as much as probably a lot of people thought.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, so far the numbers are, what, 273? Even if you put those numbers in Raila's column, they still don't close that gap. So I don't think that the Musalia would be the big question here. But definitely, if there's a runoff, a lot of people will be talking to Musalia Mudavadi.
Oh, a lot of people. But are his votes transferable? Because, and I'll use the example of William Ruto in this election. A lot of people thought that William Ruto's influence, especially in Rift Valley, was not as vast as it is turning out to be in terms of the way people in Rift Valley have voted for Jubilee. Do you think, in the case of a runoff, that could be Musalia's sort of magic time, his way back into the political limelight?
I mean, I think that you have to think about the two politicians differently. Ruto, in many respects, is a very different politician from Musalia Mudavadi. Many people will say 2007, the way that that region voted had little to do with William Ruto as a person, but in 2007 it has everything to do with him and other issues that I have been told about the way the community thinks about certain things. They value things like loyalty, they value, they abhor things like betrayal. So the message that was framed around this whole campaign was that, hey, we voted for that guy, but guess what he did? He betrayed. Yes, he betrayed us. So that resonates with a lot of people based on a lot of historical factors. So that has really worked well for him. Not to discount the fact that he's a very skillful politician who really knows how to couch his messages around different things that he's been doing.
And to work a crowd as well.
Exactly. I mean, look at the way he's talked about digital and analog, you know, and whether you like what he says or not, you just want to hear what he wants to say. So that, to that extent, he's managed that. Musalia Mudavadi, probably not as charismatic in terms of working a crowd, for example. I mean, he's had this discussion, his mantra has been safe pair of hands and that sort of thing. Yeah. But I have my doubts. I don't know whether he would go there and tell them, okay, thank you very much for voting for me. It is round 2. Please go vote for so and so. I don't think so. I think that most of the people there would have to make that decision if there is a runoff.
Then there's the logic behind a person like Uhuru Kenyatta then not dealing with Musalia Mudavadi, going maybe a level lower, step lower, to someone perhaps of the stature and the charisma of I believe is a senator elect for Kakamega, Boni Khalwale, or someone similar to that person, a person who seems to have that kind of pull. Do you think that's sort of something that could happen should the numbers change as we head towards early morning?
Like Uhuru Kenyatta doing what? Talking to people like Khalwale and
other people who are seen as Musalia's lieutenants.
Yes, I mean, they would have to be they'd have to be convinced that he is, like we said, that he has a good chance of winning, which that's round 2 if it gets to that, and he probably has a good chance, because if this goes into a runoff, I think it will be, unless something dramatic happens in the dying moments of this, if it goes into a runoff, it will be a runoff with Uhuru ahead, probably marginally. So, but we don't know what might change between now and morning. But at the end of the day, I think that the runoff will be a totally different race. And like I said, a lot of people will be talking to Musalia Mudavadi. perhaps not because he can convince a lot of people to come over, but also just in terms of perception that, guess what, the guy who was number 3 is now with us. Because again, that is important, creates the impression that this is the winning team.
And so with people like
so I'm sure like people will be talking to Dida and, you know.
Actually, and, just now that you mentioned Dida, I have a tweet here. I was just going through some of the tweets as we talked. And Conrad Masinde has tweeted the both of us and talking about the numbers that we're talking about. There's big numbers out there. But he asks, is Dida catching up with Peter Kenneth? Now, Dida at a certain point, let's actually look up there. He's ahead of Martha Karua. He's ahead of James Ole Kiapi. And catching up with Peter Kenneth.
Exactly. And when did this guy join this race? I mean, he's amazing. Probably those presidential debates. I mean, people never used to know about Dida. And I think there are people who voted for him just because they liked him or they liked his comic side of things. I mean, he was an interesting guy during the debate.
Of course, you got to ask him questions. I think from a viewer's point of view, what I think helped Dida was that very... and I don't mean this in a condescending way, but a very interesting common touch, or a very interesting way of perceiving things from a street level point of view.
Exactly, it's a basic way of framing everything. And you know, so I remember when there was this almost cosmetic discussion out between the different candidates about corruption and all these things. Then he just looked at me and said, but do you expect a thief to tell you, yes, I stole? You know, I mean, who says that sort of thing? I mean, it has to be a guy like Dida. And I remember when he was at one of the debates that were, I think, organized by the Kotu, or I think, he was Kotu. And so he was talking about healthcare in the country, and he said, you know, there's no need for you to go out of the country to be treated for cancer. All you need to do is to drink camel milk and urine. and it sounds ridiculous, but there are people who say, this is the man. You know? So look at what he's doing. I mean, Martha Karua has been around, she's been around the country. I mean,
and for all her effort at creating traction around an idealistic campaign, that's where she winds up. I mean, it's almost unfair. It's almost tragic that Martha Karua would end up in the place that she is.
And talking of Twitter, she has about 100,000 followers on Twitter, right?
More than the people that
exactly. Where did those 100,000 people go? Did they listen to her?
It's an amazing factor, but Dida's charisma and the Dida factor side in this race, we've seen everybody, but with a minor exception of Musalia Mudavadi, sort of swept aside in this race. Was it that this race was too important to think about voting for someone like Peter Kenneth, voting for someone like Martha Karua or James Ole Kiapi, or Paul Mwite for that matter?
Paul Mwite got 9,000 votes so far. but yeah, I mean, more seriously, I think that my own sense, I mean, I have no evidence about this, but my own sense is that probably in the dying moments, because we had all these stories, the opinion polls and everything, predicting a runoff, and that's a costly thing. There isn't anyone who wants to be involved in this. I certainly don't want to be on air at 4 a.m. every day
for the next
1 month. I mean, but think about it. A lot of people may have decided, wait a minute, I mean, Dida is a nice guy, but I want to put my vote somewhere where it might count for something. So I think in the final analysis, there are people who may have decided to vote one way or the other with the two candidates, just so that the country could avoid a runoff. As to whether that succeeded or not, we'll see in the next several hours.
In the next several hours. Coming towards the end, the tail end, hopefully, of this campaign and this election, what to you was perhaps the most memorable moment, something that you will stay with you throughout this campaign period?
I think it has to be the presidential debates, quite frankly, not just because I moderated one of them, which was a privilege and an honor, but I think that more seriously is the fact that they seem to have done something for the country, because here were 8 people who were running for the most important office in the country, some would say, and they would ask each other difficult questions, and at the end of it, they would shake hands and smile and carry one another's granddaughters and that sort of thing. And it created this human side of them that not many Kenyans knew about. But more importantly, I think many Kenyans began to realize, wait a minute, these guys are actually friends, you know? So we could be fighting and killing one another in the estates and whatever about them, and after that they'll go and sit somewhere, have tea and laugh, you know?
Actually, I think Martha Karua alluded to that in one of the debates, saying, you know, we are friends at the end
Exactly.
of
I mean, the two main contenders here, Uhuru and Raila, would say, my brother Raila, my brother Uhuru, my sister Martha Karua. And so it created, I think, the sort of mood that we needed for such a competitive election. I think I was discussing with some friends yesterday, and they were telling me it doesn't feel like there is such a hotly contested election that has not been resolved.
It doesn't. I mean,
there was traffic in town. The Captain of Mantha went out last night, and there were a lot of people just going about their business. Who would have done a thing like that in 2007? So to an extent, I think the presidential debates, plus other things that may have happened, helped to calm down the temperatures. That is one. Secondly, for the first time, I think the presidential candidates got to account for certain things that they have said or done in the past in a very public way, you know, where you would ask somebody about issues. You'd ask Raila Odinga about molasses. You'd ask Uhuru Kenyatta about land. You'd ask Martha Karua about her record at the Justice Ministry. And then they would come there and answer the questions. It didn't quite mean that people didn't know about these issues hanging around these presidential candidates, but to see them there so human as to say, yes,
so vulnerable,
exactly. And I think that helped to elevate the conversations to a totally different level.
It's true. I mean, there's a saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and by keeping these things inside and not sharing or not talking about, not making them part of the national conversation, created a lot of mystique. For instance, around Uhuru Kenyatta and land, around the molasses issue with Raila Odinga, around Goldenberg and Paul Mwite. It always creates a rather large monster, larger than perhaps is even the reality. But moving forward, what do you make of the kind of strides that we've been able to make in this 5-year period? Do you think that that is ever something that can be reversed? I mean, using the presidential debates as a microcosm for how Kenyans will now have an expectation of presidential candidates. Now, using that as a microcosm to the kind of reforms that we've seen over the past 5 years.
It's been absolutely phenomenal, John, because if you look at the strides that we have made as a country in the last 5 years, there are very few countries in the world that do things like that. Some of the things we've done are actually achieved over a very long period of time.
Sure.
And people have talked about no constitution being made in a time of peace. Well, of course we had our dark moments in 2007, 2008, but even with the bad things that happened then, I think that there was something good that came out of that. I mean, you can't sit here and say it was necessary for us to go through that sort of thing for us to change our country. But the fact that it happened, it's part of our history now. We can't run away from it. But there is something good that came out of it that we can look back and say that probably certain things happen in the life of a country that wakes us up to the reality that we need to change some things.
And people were really awake this time around. Look at the
way
number
people are
of peace
behaving.
messages.
I mean, right now, you probably, for example, people will hear some politicians saying something on TV and they get all upset. You know, it doesn't matter that they voted or supported that coalition or politician or whatever. They say, wait a minute, I mean, this is our country. It is bigger than all of you guys. And so I think that we have made certain strides. The Constitution is not fully implemented. You had a very interesting discussion that I think Linda was having with Sophia was speaking to Nyachai at the Bomas of Kenya, and asking about this possibility that is now actually turning into a reality, that we'll have a split parliament, we'll have a split Senate. and the National Assembly, where you would probably have even numbers there, where you'd have 100 and something for Jubilee, 100 and something for CORD, plus the smaller parties filling spaces in between. But the fact is that these people will have to negotiate, and so they can't just be the serious adversaries that they have been in this campaign. And I think the mood of the country is such that this is an important thing. Let's go out there and do it regardless of your party.
That's true. Let me just look at the names of these constituencies once more. I'm getting a lot of feedback on social media, on Twitter, on our handle like at KTN Kenya, as well as my own at John Allan Namu and Joe's. When you look at it, asking about what kind of, or rather the number of constituencies that are outlying that haven't yet been tallied. And I'll just go through them again, and maybe Joe, you can crunch the numbers with respect to getting percentages of the tallies that both Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga have been able to garner at this time. As I go through these ones again, just for the benefit of the public, Bahati, Balambala, Baringo North, Baringo South, Bomet East, Bura, Butere, Butula, Buri, Central Imenti, Chemusei, Chuka, Emuhaya, Emurua, Dikir, Fafi, Funyula, Garsen, Gishogo, Igembe North, Ijara, Ikolomani, Isiolo North, Jomvu, Kabete, Kachaliba, Kaloleni, Kangema, Kapenguria, Keses, Kibwezi East and Kibwezi West, Kiani, Kiharo, Kilifi North, Kiminini, Kisauni, Konoin, Lafey, Laisamis, Lari, Loima, Luanda, Lurambi, Mara, Manyata, Marakwet East and West, Mathare here in Nairobi, Matungulu, Mavoko, Mbere North, Mbere South, Mbita, Molo, Mount Elgon, Mumias West, Mvita, Mwala, Mwingi West, Nakuru Town West, Narok South and Narok West, Navaholo, Ndaragwa, Ndhiwa, Njoro, North Hor, North Imenti, North Mugirango, let's see, North Mugirango, Nyali, Odhaya, Pokot South, Rabai, Rangwe, Roysambu, Samburu East, Samburu North, Samburu West, Seme, Sirisia, Suna East, Suna West, Taveta, Teso North and Teso South, Thika Town, Tiati, Tongorien, Turbo, Turkana Central, East as well as West, Webuye East, and to round that one off, West Mugirango. Now, Joe, what are the figures with respect to percentages?
Well, in terms of percentages, right now Raila has 44.55%.
Edging up.
Uhuru Kenyatta has 49.6. So like I mentioned, you notice that for as long as Raila is anywhere near 45, Uhuru Kenyatta will only remain somewhere near 50 based on the figures that we're talking about, because you notice that this thing is actually between Raila and Uhuru. Mudavadi, so far, if you look at 273,000 and you try to, because the way we do these percentages, by the way, is you get the total number of votes. For instance, Uhuru has 4,104,247. Divide that by the total votes cast, 8,261,274 times 100, and you quickly get that percentage. So if you did the same for the rest of the candidates, basically if you have 44 and you have 49, then it means that what, there is some 5% floating about there between all the other candidates. So you can imagine if Raila has 45 and there's 5 floating about, then it means the other part is 50 that Uhuru is dealing with. So if the rest of the candidates get 5%, then it means if Raila gets 45, then Uhuru is left with 50. So that is why, for as long as Raila has anything near 45, and for as long as the other remaining 6 candidates are getting anything like 5% and above, then the chances of a runoff increase that much more.
And speaking of the chances of a runoff, during the release of provisional results, we saw a very large number, even higher than the votes that Musalia Mudavadi, at least the provisional votes that he had been able to garner at the time, and that was rejected votes. But in this final count, in this final tally, there are somewhere around 78,000, as opposed to the time at this point they'd have been at around 300,000. Isaac Hassan, of course, came out and explained why that was an issue. The system that was tallying these results was multiplying each spoiled vote by 8.
Yeah, that was huge.
That was a huge...
That is why 78,000 right now would have been, what, anything like over 600,000.
And that's a serious issue. What do you make of, well, I guess it's gone now, and that prospect is not as threatening as it was just, what, 2 days ago when the provisional results and the provisional tallies were being counted. But what do you make of this new dispensation with respect to that particular issue, spoiled votes? We're going to be coming into another election in 5 years. How much civic education must the IEBC do next time to ensure that they can restrict that number and make this a contest between people who actually are popular based on votes that actually made it past that
obviously
threshold?
there have been lots of discussions about the rejected votes. I know for sure that you have certain strong views about this, but I agree with you that the IEBC must embark on serious voter education, I think almost right away, even after this election. Because what we've heard is a situation where we wait for the elections to come. For the IEBC, to be fair to them, they haven't been around for that long.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, this is 6 different positions that someone is expected to take part in the voting exercise, and yet we've only had our new constitution for what? It's only 2.5. It's 2.5 years. It's going to be 3 years in the next August, 6 months or thereabouts, 5 months, and so we haven't had it for that long. So even for the most educated, for the most civic aware citizen, they still don't know a lot of things about that constitution. And that is why there was a big debate about this rejected votes and everything. A lot of people were getting shocked because the constitution talks about total votes cast in that election. That is a huge debate that some people are still having out there. But if that is the case, what about somebody who is illiterate, somebody who has never been to any classroom? Those people have problems.
Yeah.
When we went to Turkana, you know, when we were doing, you were quite involved in Quote My Vote that we were doing to basically just help in ratcheting up this civic education thing, because we realized it was not getting that far. And somebody actually said in Turkana that we had all this time to register as voters, including March 4th. So someone said, oh, so one of our reporters asked, so when is the voter registration exercise ending? Then this person says, on the 4th of March. On the 4th of March. You're not used to sitting up at 4 serious.
It's so cold.
Yeah, so I think that the voter education will have to be a critical thing in the next election, so that people are aware of these things, so that you don't have to lose your vote because you voted wrongly. That should not happen.
Well, I think I'm going to have to go and cough somewhere.
Yes,
for a moment. Maybe you can.
That is fine. I think at this point we might be going to Anne Kiguta in a short while. Remember, she has a panel down there comprising Elisha Ongoya as well as Noah Otieno. They were discussing about some of the seats that have so far been declared, the county seats, the Senate, and all this, and all these things. Remember that this is a historic election in many respects. I mean, it is the first time ever that we're going to have people in this country called governors, of course, save for the colonial times when we used to have the different people who would be holding that title around. Jomo Kenyatta, of course, was there at the time, but there is a more interesting dimension to this that is more fundamental, and that is because we're having a devolved system of government where for the first time people in the counties, 47 of them, will be sitting there and discussing and deciding what the priorities are at that local level. That is a fundamental shift in the management and governance of the country. And so that is one thing that we are going to be keeping an eye on throughout this session, throughout the next 5 years actually, to see whether this new system of government will actually kick into full gear. The other thing that we're going to be looking out for, of course, after we have known what the results are, is how are these counties going to be managed? They are the governors that have been elected. They're the senators that have been elected that are going to take charge of those counties here in Nairobi. They're going to sit in the second chamber of parliament to discuss on county issues, and that is, they're going to be helping in taking care of the counties, making sure that they're not smothered by the national government. So that is one thing that we are also going to be keeping an eye on. As we mentioned throughout this broadcast, we mentioned that there's going to be a lot of business to be transacted by Parliament, and from what we have seen, the numbers that we've seen, the composition of Parliament, and we're going to be seeing that very shortly when we speak to Anne, that actually it is likely to be a divided Parliament. In some jurisdictions, they would have terminologies like a hung parliament. There's nobody who has a clear majority in those houses, yet they'll have to do business together, even with the president that may have come from a different party. So right now I'm going to hand you over to Anne Kiguta. I need to take good care of this over here. I'm going to hand you over to Anne Kiguta, who is down there. Anne, how is it going? I thought you had gotten to sleep and abandoned me up here.